Hey everyone, Flo from OFTWOLANDS here, and today's video is my 6 months review of the Blackmagic Cinema Camera 6K. So I've already made a couple of videos about this camera. I've done a first impression and hands-on video. I've done a comparison against the 6K Pro. So in this one, I really want to focus on my experience using it as my main camera for the past 6 months. As you know, I don't like to rush when I do camera reviews. I really want to give you my honest opinion, what I like and don't like about it, and whether or not I would recommend it. And I will also touch on noise, bending and rolling shutter because I've been asked about this a lot. And before I start, don't forget to subscribe to some more videos like this one, and let's get into it. This video is sponsored by Artlist. As you know, the BMCC6K cameras have been my main cameras for the past 4 years and I absolutely love them. I've shot anything from documentaries to commercial work as well as travel and personal content. The 6K Pro though has been my main choice because I do a lot of documentary and outdoor work. I find the internal NDs and the bright tiltable screen very useful and the image is just amazing. Now, pretty much all of the cameras that I've used over the past 10 years have been Super 35 sensor ones, so I never really felt the need to go full frame. So when Blackmagic told me that they were about to release a full frame camera, I wasn't too sure what to expect and how it would fit into my workflow and my kit. And by the way, if you want to know more about the exact features and specs about this camera, feel free to watch my first impression hands-on video, because this is more of a 6 months review based on my experience rather than a technical review. So over the past 6 months, I've used this camera in various situations and in pretty much all the styles and environments that I would normally use a camera in for my type of work. I shot a mini documentary about climbing. I shot landscapes, of course. I took it hiking with me in the French Alps. I used it to capture personal content and I also took it to New York City on a trip. I also use this camera fully rigged up, but also in a very minimal way, especially when traveling. In terms of lenses, I've used a bunch of different ones. I've used spherical cinema lenses, anamorphic ones, Canon still zoom lenses, as well as native L-mount ones. For all of my EF glass, I used a Sigma MC21 adapter and I've never had any issues with it. And you can even control electronically the lenses, like change the aperture, for example. When it comes to L-mount lenses, I had to pick one because I didn't have one before and I decided to go with this one, the 24-70 Sigma 2.8. The reason I picked this one is that first of all, it's a very useful range, being a 24-70, similar to my 24-105. It's also 2.8, so it's fast enough, and it's also from a brand that I know and like. Personally, right now, I don't feel the need to invest in L-mount lenses because I've got so much EF glass and the adapter works fine. And all of the time, I shoot manual anyway, so it doesn't really matter if I've got controls or not. Just on a side note, I did have the Panasonic 24-105 IS because I wanted to replicate the Canon version that I have. And I wasn't a big fan of it. There was a bit of vignetting at 24 and that's not the lens's fault, but I really didn't like the way that it focused. I don't know if it's just me or if it's just a copy that I had, but I preferred to switch to this one and I'm very happy with this one. Another set of lenses that I'm very keen to use on this new camera is my set of Contax vintage Zeiss lenses. I've only put the 28mm very briefly and the results were amazing, so I'm really keen for that because it allows me to basically rediscover the kit since they also work on full frame cameras. And as always, all the gear will be listed below. After 6 months, I can honestly say that there is a lot that I like about this camera. First of all, the image. This is my favorite image from any camera that I've ever used. The combination of the full frame sensor and Blackmagic's raw and color science is just incredible. There's so much depth to the image and each frame is so immersive and detailed that I really find it hard to go back to anything else. Then we have open gate. The ability to shoot 6K open gate with that camera is a completely new experience for me. For years I've shot most of my content on Super 35 sensors with a 2.35 or 3:9 to 1 aspect ratio, but filming in 3x2 with that new sensor and resolution is something else. I first did some tests on landscapes that I knew by heart and they looked so different and it really surprised me. And even in a city like New York, it really transformed the image. And this means that over the past 6 months, I've approached composition in an entirely different way. This camera really makes me want to shoot and also try so many lenses, which brings me to my next point, the L-mount. This is my first L-mount camera ever and my first non-EF camera in a very long time. First of all, it allows me to try and use so many new lenses. This is of course extremely useful for actual projects, but also for someone like me that makes YouTube a big part of the business. This allows me to collaborate with more brands and have more opportunities. And I think this is also a more future-proof mount than EF, for example, when we've seen all the brands going towards mirrorless mounts. And the great thing as well is that this actually doesn't stop me from using all the glass that I already own. So basically this is a win-win. Resolutions and anamorphic options. Another great thing about this camera is the amount of ratios and resolutions that you get, especially for anamorphic content. Because of the height and the size of the sensor, you're able to use a lot more anamorphic lenses without compromising as much. You can, for example, shoot in 6x5, and that's what I did with my Greyjoy 50 1.8 times. I love using the Greyjoy lenses on a 6K Pro, but I was losing so much on the sides if I had to actually crop it to a CinemaScope aspect ratio or even a 16:9. With this new 6K camera, I was able to make use of the full image, and these are some of my favorite frames I ever shot. Media. So this is my first camera with CF Express cards, and so far I really enjoyed it. It's fast, reliable, and the reading and writing speeds are insane. I've used the Wise Pro cards and I haven't had any issues so far, regardless of the resolution or frame rates. Portability. Personally, I like the overall shape and size of this camera because of the way that I shoot. Sometimes, of course, I do rig up my camera a lot, like for documentary or commercial work, but a lot of the times I actually like to just use a camera like this: the lens, the cage, the body, internal batteries, and that's it. So having a big screen like this, for example, that's tiltable and bright, and being able to create that kind of image quality in such a small form factor is really great. I think walking the streets of New York or hiking in the French Alps for a full day and still be able to shoot 6K open gate that easily is pretty cool. Lastly, the price. I think for $25.95 what you get is pretty ridiculous. These days we get absolutely spoiled when it comes to camera gear and tech, and I think people sometimes tend to forget that. For $2,600 you get a full frame 6K camera that shoots RAW, open gate, with anamorphic options, a built-in 5-inch 1500 nit screen, a bunch of exposure and focus tools, and not to mention the color science and compression options. Now, this camera is definitely not perfect, and I want to talk about the things that I don't like, but before that, here's a quick word about today's sponsor, Artlist. So I've been working with Artlist for many years now. If you don't know what Artlist is, it's the platform that I use for all my music and SFX when it comes to my documentary and commercial work, but also for my personal, travel, and YouTube content. As a freelance filmmaker, knowing that I can use all the music and SFX on a platform without having to worry about licensing for all kinds of projects is a huge plus. And just to give you a real world example, at the moment I'm currently submitting one of my documentaries, The 90-Year-Old Cyclist, to a few festivals around the world, and that would have cost a lot of money if I had to license all of the individual tracks and SFX that I use during the project. I also find Artlist super easy to use no matter the kind of music or SFX you're looking for. And over the years, I've created dozens of collections where I regularly put tracks aside for projects that might suit later on. As an example, the music that I use for my Friends of New York video was a track that I put a while ago aside because I liked the mood, but I was waiting for the right video. And they also offer different plans depending on if you need music and SFX, or footage and templates, or if you need all of it. And if you're interested, be sure to check out the link in the description to get an extra 2 months when you subscribe to Artlist for the yearly plan. So like I said before, this is not a perfect camera, and even though I love Blackmagic cameras, as you know, I also want to be honest with you and share my actual opinion and feedback. The lack of internal NDs in this camera is by far the most frustrating thing for me. Having had internal NDs on a 6K Pro and other cameras for years before that, I find it really hard not to have them. And I don't always use internal NDs. For a lot of my commercial and documentary work, I prefer to use my Nisi R&D cinema filters to get the best quality, but it's always nice to have them just in case, depending on the project. For example, when I went hiking in the French Alps during a full day, not having internal NDs was quite annoying. The last thing you want when you go on a hike, when you go outdoors, is carry more stuff and swap filters. And I love my Nisi VND, don't get me wrong, but for travel and outdoor content, I will always prefer to have a camera that has internal NDs. So I think when it comes to hiking or personal content, I'll probably revert back to the 6K Pro just because of that reason. And it was the same in New York City, but the light wasn't as harsh and I didn't have to rely as much on a VND. On the plus side though, the OLPF seems to redo its job with IR pollution, and it's definitely a step up from the other 6K cameras. So I know I just said that I like the form factor and the overall shape, but I was really hoping for something new, at least in terms of the look. Even a different color or new material would have been fine. Personally, I would love a more rugged version. I don't know if that means a new material or for it to be more weather sealed, because for documentary and outdoor content that would be very, very useful. And I think new and updated connections on the side like SDI or full XLR would have been appreciated by many. Next is frame rates. So being able to only shoot 36 FPS in 6K open gate is a bit disappointing. And you can definitely shoot in higher frame rates in other aspect ratios and resolutions, but when I shoot RAW, I always prefer to shoot with the full sensor, the full resolution, so in that case 6K open gate, and then make different choices in terms of the aspect ratio or the resolution in post. With the 6K and the 6K Pro, for example, I often shoot in 50 or 60 FPS, and I found this very useful when it comes to either documentary or commercial work, and it's a look and the feel that I love, and I'm really missing this on this camera. So I think having something like 48 FPS would have actually made quite a big difference. Because depending on what you're shooting, if it's like people or let's say waves or anything with motion, 36 can actually feel a bit underwhelming. This is not a major one, but having only one slot for media can have a few issues. So for example, you get less internal storage to start with, but it also means more risk in terms of like if something happens to the only slot. Yes, you can record with external SSDs and things like that, but I'm talking purely in terms of the design. I think having two slots is obviously safer. I really enjoy having the two slots on my 6K and a 6K Pro, not because I want to use both, but just because you know in the back of your mind that if something happens to one, you have the other. And it can also mean that you can go from one card to the other without having to worry about changing the card or swapping. So this is something that I think should be added if there was an upgraded version of this one. Honestly, I've never had any issues with all the Blackmagic cameras that I've ever used, but this is something to think about. No ProRes. So not being able to shoot ProRes in this camera at all is something that is a bit frustrating for me. I think ProRes is a widely used format when it comes to clients for deliverables, and also for someone like me that does a lot of licensing content. And yes, you can of course transcode it very quickly in DaVinci. It takes only a few minutes, and I do that for my own work as well. But if you're not the one editing or actually working on a project, if you're basically just handing the footage over, that can be an issue if the only option is B-roll. This was the same case for the OFTWOLANDS that I had a couple of years ago, and it's not something that is a deal breaker. I mean, it could be, for me it's not, but it's something worth mentioning. So because this is a full frame sensor and the sensor itself is quite large, you can get a bit of vignetting on some lenses. So for example, I did have some vignetting on my Surreal 24mm full frame Jupiter, and also quite a lot on my 35mm anamorphic Greyjoy. This is easily fixed in post, of course, and obviously more noticeable if you shoot in full 6K open gate and you actually intend to deliver in that format. So now I want to touch briefly on noise, bending and rolling shutter, since I've had so many questions about it over the past 6 months. So yes, there's definitely noise on this camera, especially at higher ISOs, but I didn't find it to be an issue any more than with the 6K Pro. I shot in low light at f4 in New York quite a bit, and it was very easy to fix to get a clean image. I think you do get slightly more noise than in the 6K Pro, but like I said, it's very easy to fix, and I actually don't personally shoot a lot in low light. And just to give you an example, this is some footage that I shot in Shanghai a few years ago with the BMCC6K, and you can see the amount of noise that was before and after when I cleaned it. So this is very similar to the footage that I shot in New York with a 6K full frame. So I did notice a bit of bending on some buildings when I was in New York, but nothing crazy. One time when I was hiking in the French Alps, I did notice some bending on the actual monitor of the camera when I was filming the blue skies. I was really worried at first, but then when I imported the footage in DaVinci on the computer, it was gone. So it was actually the monitor, not the footage itself. Yes, I think we can all agree that rolling shutter is not great, as you can see for example in this subway clip from New York. Does that bother me? Nah, not really, because of the type of shoots that I do. I think personally from experience shooting documentary and outdoor work, rolling shutter has never been something that I keep on my mind or something that I paid attention to. I think if you do a lot of fast-paced content like sports, yeah, this is going to be an issue for you. But for me, for what I do, it's not something that I pay attention to and something that worries me. And to be completely transparent with you guys, if these were issues that were happening to me or with this camera, I wouldn't use it. I do have the 6K and the 6K Pro as my main cameras as well if I want to, and I know some people seem to not believe me. I've had a few like conversations and arguments with people in comments, but I don't know, look at the content that I've created with this camera, whether it's like landscape or travel documentaries or whatever. It's all there. I'm not hiding anything, and yeah, I don't know what else to say. This Blackmagic Cinema Camera 6K is a tricky one. I think they really put the emphasis on the image in the new sensor. I think the image coming out of this camera is incredible, and in my opinion, reason enough to get it. Plus you get all the options in terms of aspect ratios and resolutions, and the flexibility of L mounts, all of that for under 2,600 bucks. But on the other hand, you pretty much still get the same body as the 6K Pro, the 6K G2 with its limitations, and you also like internal NDs. This camera got quite a bit of negative comments when it first got announced, and I don't want to anger anybody by saying this, but I think if you are unhappy or complain that much about a specific camera or brand, maybe it's not the one for you. And if you still do love Blackmagic as a brand for the color science of the cameras, you still have all the other cameras, all the BMCC lineup and the OSA models that are more than capable cameras. Recently, there also has been a lot of talks about mods coming out for the 4K and the 6K to improve the cameras. And whilst I think it's great to see people doing things like that, I've been asked personally if I would get one or if I was interested. Not really. First of all, because of the warranty issue, I think it's kind of hard when you start modifying cameras. You don't really know where you stand, unless obviously they offer warranty, and that's great. But personally, I would always prefer to buy an actual camera from an actual brand, from an actual store. And the second reason is because I think personally, and again, I keep saying that, this is my opinion, that you can pretty much get to the same results by rigging or by completely changing the system to get something that better suit your need for your type of work. Personally, I really like this new 6K full frame camera, and I intend to make it my main camera whenever I can. It also makes me very excited for what's to come from Blackmagic when they start putting this new sensor on a new body. Maybe it will be a new BMCC, or maybe it will be a new OSA, but personally I would prefer something in between. That's it for me for today, guys. Hopefully you found this video helpful. Let me know in the comments if you need to know anything else, and I'm also keen to hear what you think about this camera. And as always, thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.
Also, feel free to check out my 2 ebooks, Freelance Documentary Filmmaking and Travel Cinematography, where you can find a streamlined but comprehensive overview from pre-production all the way to marketing, built on years of my own experience shooting short documentaries and travel videos around the world. And if you are interested, I'm also doing filmmaking mentoring sessions when you can ask me anything about a wide variety of topics.